Coconut oil. It aids in fat loss, it has anti-cancer properties, and it also boosts your brain power. Now, can you actually lose fat by eating more fat? Well, if that fat is coconut oil, then yes. Take this study, for instance. Replacing the dreaded sunflower, safflower, or soybean oils from 8% of the diet down to 1% and replacing that fat with coconut oil instead actually reduces the amount of fat gained in these animals, and it does so by reducing the feed efficiency. Now, the feed efficiency just means that the animals ate more food and gained less weight, whereas when they were on the seed oils, the vegetable oil diets, they ate the same amount of food, but they actually gained more weight per the amount of food they were eating. In fact, coconut oil is so powerful that even if you swap out just 5% of the amount of fat in the diet from lard and you transfer it over to coconut oil, you get dramatic effects. So here's another study doing just that. And as you can see here, simply replacing 5% of the fat in the diet from lard into coconut oil actually lowers the body weight of these animals. What's even crazier is that if you look at their livers, the animals with the control, it's nice and pink. That means that there's no fat. But then you look at the lard-fed animals and all of that nasty white area, that's fat accumulating in the liver. But then if you look at the coconut oil-fed animals, there's a little bit of white, but really not anywhere close to the amount that is in the lard. And the type of white is in these droplets. It's not in the cells, if you can see that, like it is in lard. And when it's in the cells, that's a lot more dangerous. So we can say that a small change in the amount of coconut oil that you put in the diet in place of lard, which is actually closer to vegetable oil in its fat composition, is highly beneficial for liver fat. The animals swapping out 5% of the fat for coconut oil actually had an improvement in insulin sensitivity as well. So they had a lower AUC for glucose when administered insulin. The AUC is the area under the curve. Basically, they had less glucose. They had a greater drop in their glucose once they were given insulin, and a high glucose AUC is indicative of insulin resistance. So long story short, these animals had improved insulin resistance just from that 5% swap. What's even cooler about these animals is that they had a higher VO2, which means that they breathed in more oxygen. They breathed out more carbon dioxide, and that led to an increase in energy expenditure because the fundamental way that we produce energy is by taking in oxygen and we breathe out carbon dioxide, and that's how we get energy. So the coconut oil alone, just that 5% swap, allowed these animals to eat the same amount of calories and lose the weight because it increased their metabolism. We can see this in humans as well. Here's one study giving women about 2 tablespoons of coconut oil, and this is just adding it on top of their existing diet. They showed that in comparison to the soybean oil diet, who had no change in their waist circumference, if you look at the coconut oil diet, they did have a slight change in their waist circumference, a decrease in their waistline, which is pretty awesome when you consider that they weren't even changing their diet. They were just eating extra coconut oil. Another study confirmed that. This one, people were eating about 2.5 teaspoons extra of coconut oil, and after 3 months, they saw a dip in their waist circumference. Then there's the famous story that Dr. Puppen talked about in his book on coconut oil. Basically, in the 1940s, there were these pig farmers, and they tried to feed their pigs with coconut oil to fatten them up so that they could get bacon and lard and stuff, but it actually didn't work. The animals just got leaner. Instead, they started giving them thyroid suppressive drugs, and eventually they figured out that they could give them corn oil, and that would also have the same metabolic suppressing effects, and then the animals would get all fat. But the point is, it's pretty crazy that they tried to fatten these animals with coconut oil, and it just didn't even work. In fact, it did the opposite. It made them lean. So coconut oil, yes, it'll help you in fat loss, it'll help with insulin resistance, and it'll even boost that metabolism, as we saw. Now, how exactly does this work? Well, the types of fats in coconut oil are a little bit different. So what you're looking at here is the so-called carnitine shuttle. And the carnitine shuttle is essentially a way that your cells can bring in long-chain fats into your mitochondria, where your energy is produced. And notice I said long chain fats because this is irrelevant for medium chain triglycerides or medium chain fats. They actually bypass this system and they just go right into the mitochondria where they get burned for energy. So they get burned for energy much faster than normal fats. And that's where the beauty of coconut oil comes in, because coconut oil is much richer in these MCTs than other types of fats. So in other words, these fats almost never get stored in the long run in your fat tissue. They almost always get oxidized immediately because there's nothing to stop them. Now, if you're looking for a metabolic boost or to alleviate any of your health issues regarding weight gain or really anything else with your metabolism, then I definitely suggest you check out Prism. Prism is the coaching platform that we run here at Analyze and Optimize. We have an in-depth, comprehensive care platform. We have a full team of practitioners. We all work together. We do lab testing, and we've served nearly 500 clients to date. And 94% of our clients report improvement in at least one symptom when they work with us. So if you're interested in that, definitely click the link here and schedule a free call where we can discuss more about how we can help you over at Prism. So any of your health goals, be sure to check that out. Now, I want to switch gears a little bit here and talk about the brain. Now, you may have heard of this odd-looking protein. It's called amyloid beta. And these amyloid beta peptides, or proteins, when they're put on neurons, it actually kills them. It's very toxic to them. And this is the fundamental basis of Alzheimer's disease. You may have heard of these amyloid beta plaques in the past. However, what's cool is that if you take coconut oil and you put them on the neurons beforehand, it actually protects them. So this B and F column here, these are neurons. The A and E columns, they weren't exposed to anything. That's your control group. And then you can see that the amyloid beta kind of rips apart a lot of that webbing, a lot of that structure around the neurons. And that's a sign of toxicity. Those are the neurons that are treated with just coconut oil. And then these are the neurons that are treated with that amyloid beta plaque and the coconut oil. So yes, the amyloid beta still did do some damage, but the researchers stated that it really prevented a lot of the damage from those amyloid beta peptides, which again are characteristic of Alzheimer's disease. Then if you look on the bottom, you can see the volume and the sphericity of the mitochondria in these neurons. And if you've ever seen a mitochondria, it's not very spherical. It's more like a elongated oval, right? So if a mitochondria becomes more spherical, like it does when it's exposed to the amyloid beta, that's not a good thing. That means that it's kind of shriveling up and dying and not producing properly. But again, when we add coconut oil to it, we can see that there's an improvement there. It also increased the total volume of the mitochondria, and the size of the mitochondria typically we think of as an indicator of how robust it is, how good it is at producing energy. This has been confirmed in other studies. So again, if you look at the B and E panels, what you're looking at here is the green part, or what are called the dendrites of the neurons, and the red is a protein called tau. Now, tau accumulates in Alzheimer's disease. So the more red you see with those white arrows in the B and C panels, that's not good. But that's what the amyloid beta does when it's next to your brain cells. It destroys them. It accumulates these red tau proteins. Well, they're not actually red. They just look red in this picture. But once again, once you add in the coconut oil, you get a reversal of that. So you don't get any of that fragmentation of the dendrites, and you don't get nearly as much red tau proteins, which is obviously a good sign. Now, this doesn't just happen in a test tube in the lab either. It actually happens if you give it to people. So for instance, this was one study done, gave people about 1.5 tablespoons of coconut oil a day, which really is not that much. And again, they hypothesized because of those medium chain triglycerides that get oxidized in the mitochondria quickly, they would help these people with Alzheimer's disease, moderate to severe Alzheimer's disease, I might add. And what they found was a decrease in their cognitive symptoms measured by this 8S-COG, and 84% of the patients reported improvement in their quality of life overall, judged by their clinicians. Now, this is a pretty crazy looking graph, and yes, that is a dog, but the point still stands, and this is the anti-epileptic mechanism behind medium chain triglycerides. And medium chain triglycerides have been used to prevent seizures for about a century now alongside the ketogenic diet. But because those medium chain triglycerides get turned into ketones so fast, because they get burned for energy so fast, you actually don't even need a keto diet if you have enough MCTs in the diet. And the reason that it prevents seizures is, I know this is a very complicated figure here, but I just want you to focus on this part. It basically increases the amount of GABA relative to glutamate. And glutamate is what excites your neurons. It fires them up. And this is good in a lot of cases, but if you're prone to seizures, then the main problem happening is that your neurons are firing way too much, and you need more of that balance, that calming, that GABA. And the MCT oil, or the coconut oil that's rich in MCT, can help you get there. An important thing that coconut oil can do for your brain is that it can reduce the amount of inflammation. So this is another pretty recent study that showed that administering coconut oil oil with a high-fat diet instead of just the standard, soybean oil or lard high-fat diet lowered all of the inflammatory markers in the brain. So you're looking at IL-1 beta, IL-6, TNF alpha, and nuclear factor kappa B. In multiple different brain regions, coconut oil across the board seem to have a benefit. And what you're looking at here is basically the activation of this thing called the NLRP3 inflammasome. It's this very cool, it kind of looks like a Beyblade or like some kind of wheel. I don't know. I think it looks cool, but it's not cool. It's a protein that ends up killing your cells and triggers all this inflammation. And as you can see, it produces that IL-1 beta, which is one of the primary inflammatory cytokines. And lots of inflammation in your brain is definitely not what you want for optimal cognitive function or mental health. For instance, one of the main ways that researchers make animals depressed in the lab is by giving them something called LPS or endotoxin, and that directly makes them depressed. And the reason behind that is that this LPS, this endotoxin, it increases the inflammation in the brain. But lo and behold, little old virgin coconut oil actually stops the depression in these animals. And the reason for that is because, like we discussed before, it has that anti-inflammatory effect in the brain. Super cool stuff. Now, why exactly does coconut oil have this anti-inflammatory benefit? Well, in virgin coconut oil, that is unrefined coconut oil, you have a ton of these phenolic compounds, and these phenolic compounds have antioxidant benefits. Essentially, they neutralize things like free radicals that can damage cells. And the reason why that's important is because ROS here is reactive oxygen species or free radicals. And what those ROS do is they end up activating this NFKB. This is basically a protein that regulates genes in your DNA, but it just turns on a bunch of inflammatory genes. But the ROS directly activates that gene. So anything that acts as an antioxidant is going to end up lowering inflammation, and typically vice versa as well. But that's the main reason why coconut oil is able to have this anti-inflammatory benefit. The anti-inflammatory benefit of coconut oil is not just limited to your brain. For instance, we have recent studies showing that even as little as about an equivalent of a teaspoon of coconut oil per day in animals can suppress the symptoms of inflammatory bowel syndrome. So it really robustly reduces that gut inflammation that you have through the same mechanisms by reducing that oxidative stress. All of these conditions end up coming down to the same couple of core factors, and the coconut oil seems to have a very important impact on that. And then we have at least one case study showing that in active human ulcerative colitis, which is a pretty brutal disease of gut inflammation, someone decided to actually do a coconut oil enema, which is, yes, putting the coconut oil up your rear end. And that sounds very unpleasant to me, but if you have inflammatory bowel disease, you're going to do whatever it takes. And lo and behold, if you look at this figure here, you're seeing a complete resolution in the symptoms of their colitis, which is just astonishing. So that's not to say that you necessarily need to, put coconut oil up there directly, because we have the animal studies showing that if you just take it orally, it has a benefit. But it's pretty incredible that it's able to do this. Another cool benefit of coconut oil is that it has some antibacterial benefits. So this is a study showing that if you take coconut oil and you rinse it in your mouth for 10 minutes, people like to call it oil pulling, then it actually substantially reduces the amount of bacteria. And this is chlorhexidine. This is the standard kind of nasty treatment for things like cavities in terms of reducing the bacterial load in the mouth. And coconut oil, there was no difference between the two. So it was pretty much just as good as the chlorhexidine in reducing these cavity-causing bacteria. And the reason that they're able to do that is they essentially produce acid and they create these plaques that I'm sure you're all familiar with. But it really is a bacterial issue at the end of the day. And 10 minutes of coconut oil was a very good therapeutic in this study and others. Now, here's some questions that I typically get about coconut oil. The first one is, how much do you take? And typically in these studies, it's around 1 to 3 tablespoons orally, animal to human equivalent or in humans, or it's just replacing the other oils in the diet like we saw. To me, the latter is definitely the better option. I don't know why you would just eat extra coconut oil on top of what you're already eating. You could. But I think you're definitely gonna get more bang for your buck if you actually just stop eating the cheaper crap oils and you get in more coconut oil into your diet. The other questions I get is, can you cook with it? And yes, you can. Just know that the longer and higher heat you cook it, the more you're going to degrade those phenolic compounds, which in the virgin coconut oil seems to be responsible for a lot of the benefits. I like to put it in things like mashed potatoes. I'll put it on veggies. I'll put it a little bit in rice, steaks, bread, eggs, any food that you would normally put fat in, you can use coconut oil with. And the last thing is that you are going to want it to be virgin. I mean, you will still get benefit from things like isolated MCT oil or refined coconut oil. But the virgin coconut oil is what tends to have a lot of these benefits. So I would definitely recommend going for that. If you want to get lab testing with anything, I would definitely check out Revelation Diagnostics. It's our lab testing company. You don't need a doctor. You get personalized reports and everything is very streamlined, easy, and it's all at a discount. So if you want to get any lab testing directly to you, please click the link here and go check that out. But that's going to do it for this video. Let me know if you guys like this new format. Let me know if you want to hear more about coconut oil. I'd be happy to make more content on it. Definitely check out our website, check out our social medias, and definitely if you want any personalized help, go check out Prism. And yeah, I will see you guys in the next video.